Chapter 23, Crossroads. Swarm sat at the small bare metal table in front of the cafe and tried not to be nervous. The place wasn't one of Sana's usual haunts. Too expensive, and the bagel shop across the square was better, so she hadn't gotten anything fancy. Just blackberry tea. The tea was cheap, and, more importantly, warm even through her gloves. Once it cooled enough to drink, it would be sweet from all the cream and honey she'd dumped in it. Of course, that begged the question of how the heck she was going to drink it with her mask in the way, but she'd cross that bridge when she got there. While the tea was a mistake, and the cafe was a less than ideal business to patronize, the square itself was nice. It was far longer than it was wide, with traffic circling a good-sized central island. The center of the island hosted a tall fountain, and either end held some stubby evergreens and patchy grass. Each patch of trees also had a park bench under the shade. The benches were unoccupied, but a young couple was perched on the edge of the fountain and sharing a meal. The cafe was near the middle of the block. It was mostly empty right now, and the sidewalk was equally deserted. Not surprising, seeing how it was 4 in the afternoon. The officers she'd agreed to meet weren't due to show up for another 15 minutes, and that was if they arrived early. Swarm hoped she wouldn't be kicked out before then. That concern prompted a series of thoughts she wouldn't have considered if her anxiety wasn't ramping up. She'd never been booted for loitering before, but Swarm was suspicious. She was wearing black and red armor and a cloak. Not exactly the type of patron businesses like this wanted sticking around. The barista who'd handed over the tea had been nervous during their entire interaction. It wasn't a reaction Sana was used to. Girls her size tended to be more nuisance than threat. If anything, the expression was reminiscent of some of the looks her dad would get. Sana didn't see them often, since her standing next to him lowered his perceived danger level significantly. Strong men were a lot scarier than skinny girls, and she qualified as the former right now. That raised another question. Should she think of herself as a she while in costume? Everyone would think of and refer to Swarm as a man, so would it be strange for her to think of herself as a girl? Would she be less likely to slip if she went all the way into the Swarm persona, pronouns and all? What was that called? Method acting? It couldn't hurt to try he supposed. If it got too strange, he could always switch back. He was jolted out of his thoughts by whispers and giggles from the table behind him, the only other one occupied at the moment. He peeked over his shoulder and saw a trio of brightly dressed girls a little younger than Sana. They were leaning over their table far enough to touch foreheads. After a second, one broke off from the other two and looked at him? When she caught him staring, she squeaked and turned back to the cluster. The whispering picked up both speed and volume. Weird. But hey, Sana was weird too. The only difference was she made efforts to be subtle about it. Curiosity satisfied, Swarm turned back to his tea and stared it down, debating whether or not he should throw it out. The chatter behind him reached a fever pitch, and Swarm finally caught a few fragments over the noise of traffic and the splashing of the fountain in the center of the square. You ask him. No way, you. It was your idea. Nuh-uh. Oh, for Pete's sake, I'll do it. The scraping of metal over concrete heralded the departure of one of the girls. Swarm paid it no mind until a voice by his shoulder said, Excuse me. He jumped a bit and turned to see the girl who'd been staring at him. She was a bit shorter than Sana and dressed in a pair of jean shorts and a bright pink t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she had a large number of thread bracelets around her wrists. Swarm found himself intimidated when he really shouldn't have been. Yes? Can I help you? She jutted out her chin to comical effect. In an imperious tone, she demanded, You're Swarm, right? He nodded slowly. Where was she going with this? She produced a phone in a case decorated with a herd of horses and held it up. Can my friends and I take a picture with you? What? An autograph would be neat too. Come on, it won't take long and you're not doing anything. She wiggled the phone. Sure. He'd lost control of the situation. The girl smiled and waved her friends over. All 3 of them clustered in front of Swarm, who held up his hand in a peace sign out of a lack of any better ideas. For how strange the situation was, it was over quickly. 5 selfies and 3 signatures later, the trio stepped back. Thanks, said the spokesgirl. You're welcome. He wished she'd explain what the deal with the picture was, but had no idea how to ask. He settled for giving advice instead. You 3 stay safe. Don't go asking strange men for pictures again, okay? You're lucky I'm nice. One of the girls snorted. You're a superhero. You have to be nice. That prompted Swarm to give them a small, sad smile. Not that they could see it, considering the full-face mask of Swarm's costume. Sana had done a lot of research in the past few months, and she knew exactly how wrong the girl was.
You'd hope that. It's not always true. What if I were someone else dressed up as Swarm, or I was lying about being a hero?
He resisted the urge to pat their heads.
It's not wise, especially since I don't see your parents nearby. Be more careful in the future.
We will, promised the last girl with a severity that meant she'd forget it as soon as Swarm was out of sight. Oh well, he tried. He waved to them as they went back to their table, and the spokesgirl waved back. It made him smile, genuinely this time. Are you done? Swarm didn't jump. He turned to see two uniformed policemen and a dark-haired woman wearing a nice black pantsuit. The officers were familiar to Swarm, Detectives Archer and Valentin. The stranger was carrying a manila folder stuffed with papers and had an expression of poorly concealed stress. Detective Archer had a smirk on his face, and Detective Valentin was glowering. It was obvious which of the three had spoken. Swarm kept his body language loose and casual.
Sure am. You're early.
Pot kettle, said the detective.
Touche. Shall we get started?
He gestured to the table.
Have a seat.
The detectives took Swarm's right and left sides, while the woman sat directly across from him. She filed through her papers for a moment. The movement drew Swarm's attention to the delicate gold jewelry around her wrists and neck. She cleared her throat before speaking. Hello, Swarm. My name is Allison Rivers. I'm an attorney with the DA's office. You are Swarm, correct? Swarm nodded, disintegrated a small portion of his cloak, and collected the bots in an apple-sized cloud above his hand.
I got an upgrade.
At the terrified stare on Mrs. Rivers' face and the way too interested look on Detective Archer's, Swarm put the bots back.
I know who the detectives are. Before we get started, I have to apologize to you, Detective Valentin.
Everyone at the table looked surprised. Swarm pushed on before they could say anything.
Using your son to transport the flash drive containing my message to Prince Snow was a mistake, one I deeply regret. If I had thought it through more, I never would have put either you or him in that position. I understand if you wish not to work with me, but you are my first choice for a liaison. I chose you as the recipient of the drive for that reason. I will work with someone else, though, if you find the idea too intolerable.
Detective Archer slumped back in his seat. Huh, what do you know? You're not completely oblivious. Just a bit. You don't seem malicious either. Told you, DV. Do not call me that in front of the super, he snapped. He leaned forward in his irritation, but manners kept him in his seat. Swarm resisted the urge to make a snarky comment. It was stronger when in character as opposed to being Sana. The ball was in Detective Valentin's court, and pushing him would make things worse. He had to wait for the detective's response. It took a long time. Eventually, he sighed. I can't trust you. I will work with you, but I don't like you. Valid. Better than Swarm was hoping for, in all honesty.
I understand. I won't begrudge you a punch, but I will caution you that my face is as armored as the rest of me, and you'll probably hurt yourself.
He failed to hide his disappointment. Swarm cracked a smirk and was glad he couldn't see it.
Fair warning.
Don't rub it in. Ms. Rivers dropped her files on the table with a smack, loud enough to grab everyone's attention. She screwed up her courage and said, Swarm, the contract you sent to my division seemed to favor the department, barring a few clauses. I wanted to ask why. He picked up his tea and waved it dismissively, but didn't drink it.
You can be in multiple places at once. I can't. You have training in regards to the capture of suspects. I don't. You're an established presence in Calabria. I'm not. The only things I have going for me are firepower, anonymity, and sturdiness. It doesn't make sense for me to be the one calling the shots.
What about once you have experience?
By the time I have that kind of experience, I won't be needed anymore.
He let his smile turn sincere.
I'm a super expert, first and foremost. If I get called in to help with an investigation or disaster, it's unlikely I'll say no. However, that's not my job, and I don't want it to be. Something tells me you don't want that either.
Something is right, Detective Valentin groused. He crossed his arms and refused to look at Swarm. Ms. Rivers ignored him. And are you truly willing to provide your services without requesting compensation? Now that she'd gotten over her apprehension, she was every inch the consummate professional.
Yes.
Why?
I'm going to be completely honest with you.
He put down his tea in front of Detective Archer. Swarm couldn't drink it, but he seemed most likely of the trio to take it.
Money isn't my goal. I'm doing this because I have people to protect.
Who? Innocent curiosity had not prompted that question. Swarm tipped his head to the side a fraction, drawing attention to his mask. She was smart enough to redirect the conversation. You are aware that you are still a suspect in the Lord Static murder, yes?
I figured.
He slumped back in his seat.
I don't have the means, but I'm wearing a motive. I had to be there, so I had the opportunity. I am honestly surprised you haven't arrested me yet.
Couldn't find you, Detective Valentin grunted. You're wearing the means, too, Detective Archer pointed out. He was poking at the tea with his pen.
They're not. For one, he had them before I did, so how could I have used them to kill him? It's illogical.
Really, Swarm had thought they would be smarter than that.
For another, I'd show you what would happen if I tried to replicate the murder method with these, but I'd rather not risk a heart attack or a seizure. Even without that, getting a nosebleed while fully masked would suck.
We can't trust your word on that, Detective Valentin said. At least he was looking Swarm's way now.
If you do arrest me, I'll give you a demonstration. Just have a doctor on standby.
Ms. Rivers shook her head. That won't be necessary. The DA's office has no intention of bringing you up on charges at this time. Until more evidence is collected, you're only a suspect. Means, motive, and opportunity is really a nice story to tell juries and sell the audience of TV shows. Too many people have it in any given case to be useful. Huh. You learn something new every day. Swarm traced the metal grate that made up the table's surface with a finger.
Is that why you're entertaining the idea of working with me?
Essentially. Once you cross the line, circumstances will change. Swarm nodded and switched to drumming his fingertips on the table.
Do you want to spend some more time before signing the contract? I can't guarantee I won't step in if I'm near a villain attack, but I won't hold you to anything in there until both of our signatures are on it.
And that was when people started screaming. Swarm whirled up to see the commotion and caught sight of a familiar isolated snowstorm at the end of the block. Prince Snow had either the worst timing on the planet or the best.
Get people out of here while I hold him off,
he shouted, all pretense of calm gone. Swarm, wait, he cut her short.
What did I just say about villain attacks?
He turned to the officers and said,
DV, call backup. DA, start crowd control and evacuation procedures. Kids,
he shouted. The three girls from before dashed over to his side. Smart cookies.
Stay with the officers and Ms. Rivers. They'll keep you safe. Ms. Rivers?
Got it. She held out her arms, and the girls huddled in front of her. Swarm nodded. He dispersed his cloak and clicked his heels, summoning skates.
Consider this a demonstration of what I can bring to your company.
He gave them a rakish grin and skated off, summoning a javelin on the way.